Well, you all are in for a real treat. Born and raised in the Midwest, Mary Anne Morefield lives at tripartite, an interesting life in central Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Chautauqua, New York. She is an alumna of Wesley College and Goddard College. She holds a Master's of Divinity from Lutheran Theological Seminary in Gettysburg and a Doctor of Ministry, from Boston University School of Theology. She was an organic farmer who lived on an 18th century farm in Silver Springs Township, delivered brown eggs to her friends, made goat's milk yogurt for her family, and rode her horse through the countryside. Following seminary and ordination in both the United Methodist and Lutheran Church, Mary Anne served as a parish pastor and as chaplain of Dickinson College, right here in Carlisle, of course. Now retired, she spends the summer at Chautauqua Institution among its active literary arts community. She served as vice president of the Writers Center and as president of the Chautauqua Literary Arts Friends. Mary Anne is a member of the Seminary Ridge Foundation in Gettysburg, which oversees the Seminary Ridge Museum. Her first poem was published when she was in high school. Her work has been included in various journals. Mary Anne Morefield has been involved in the Cumberland County Historical Society for decades, as you will hear this afternoon. She served on the board of directors in the 80s, was chairman of the library committee at some point, and continues to support the society. And as my friend and neighbor, Mary Anne helps me with encouraging our Bethany Village neighbors, to be aware of the Cumberland County historical programs and exhibits. We are all in for a real Cumberland County treat. Please join me in welcoming Mary Anne Morefield. It's such fun to be here and to see wonderful, familiar faces, people that I have walked with, people that I have worked with, people that I have known for years, new friends, Chautauquans and all. I am delighted to be here. This is indeed a poetry reading, but I hope it's also a very unusual historical poetry reading. I have lived in Cumberland County for longer than any other place, and I write about local things and about local people. Many of the poems that you'll hear today are written from our farm. It's a historic farm. It's along the Conn de Gwinnett. It's in Silver Spring Township, and it was warranted in 1767. The family that lived there would have lived there prior to having it warranted, which means it was surveyed at that point. And the deed for the farm reads, starting at an oak and following the several courses of the creek to a rock. That farm was where John and Mary Carruthers brought up their children until they died from arsenic. They now lie in the cemetery at Silver Spring Church, and I'll fill in the details of that murder as I read poems from my book. I think it's probably best to save your questions till later. I'll be very happy to answer any of them.
but I'm going to kind of let the story unfold itself. I will start with the title poem from the book, and it's called Earth, Grass, Trees, and Stone. It does not take place in Cumberland County, but takes place at Chautauqua. For the first time since we left you in this place of earth, grass, trees, and stone, I've come to hear its silence and its sounds, to learn the beauty of granite, its veins, lakes, and rivers on which seed boats float, and on whose banks a fly dries itself after bathing. I've come to feel the weight of summer sun, watch thunderheads pile on the horizon, leaves of an oak I cannot name quiver in the rising breeze. Of all the trees, it was oaks you loved, the pen oak that marked the farm's corner, red oaks we planted along the drive. I take one leaf to press between pages of your field guide to trees, to add a New York oak to your Pennsylvania collection. Today, birds are hidden. No flash of cardinal, no hint of orange or blue, not even a sparrow. Yet I hear songs in the tallest trees, know from droppings that birds have visited you. A red truck drives by, stops at the end of the lane. A woman hops out, bends over a bush, reaches as if picking raspberries. Or maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps I'm only remembering days in July, picking black raspberries from corners of the pasture, remembering jam I made for you, the way you always said, thank you. So in this poem, you're introduced to that oak on the corner that's in the deed for the farm. And that oak is called a pen oak, and it is in books about pen oaks. They are trees that stood when William Penn was granted the land of Pennsylvania. Now I'm going to read some poems about living on the farm. Spring blessings. Twin ewes, immense in winter coats, too heavy under bright spring sun, watch the farmer lay burlap in the shade of the stone bank barn. Watch as he draws out clippers, trimmers, iodine. Watch unflinching. Do not turn away or run, awaiting this ritual, this blessing. He walks to them. They squat and pee. Pellets fall and pile on the ground as he wraps a lead loosely around the neck of one. Without protest, she follows, lets him circle his sinewy arms around her and quickly flip her to her bottom. She sits in quiet acquiescence, yellow eyes fixed upon her sister who edges near. The farmer's hands are sure, the clippers sharp and true. Wool falls until she sits around it, sits pink and nude and new. Only once the clipper nicks her. Blood runs red across her shoulders down. The ewe does not complain as she is dabbed with blue. The farmer strokes her ear, releases her, small now, to the field of dandelion spring. Well, those ewes have a connection to this society. They were raised on the Holtry's farm, brought to the Holtry's farm, and Kara is our librarian, and it was her father who was doing the clipping of the ewes. So the connections are all around. There is a form of poetry that many of you may not be familiar with, but it's called the haibun. It's a very old form of poetry, and it doesn't look like a normal poem. It's made up of a prose poem, which is not written, not lineated. It goes from one side of the page to the other, and it's a block. And then it is followed by a haiku, which most of you know what a haiku is, 575, a syllabic form that usually talks about something to do with nature. So there's some specific rules for this form. The words are still as carefully written as if they are in regular lines. This one is called Haibun in Cumberland County. A farmer heads north, then south, and north again, across the field he's mowed so many times in a ritual of early summer. He does not swerve, cuts everything. Tall grass, weeds, nesting birds, small creeping things, everything falling in rows, everything fallen, exposed to the heat of noonday sun. The cat falls too, her side slashed by blades of the mower. She lies unseen as the farmer turns to cut another row. Dust rises to mix in the air with the scent of wild rose, honeysuckle, and hay. Heat is heavy on his shoulders. His mouth and eyes are dusty dry. The mower jolts, clatters, rumbles like the thunder he hopes won't come. He needs 4 days to get the hay dry, turned, baled, and in. 4 dry days to fill the barn against the coming winter. He turns and turns again. Now the haiku. Thunderheads pile high on the western horizon, a flash of lightning. Those of you who don't live on farms may not know about this. So I'm going to read you a poem called The Groundhog. All summer we watched, I the planter and he the thief, seed to seedling, leaf to vines, blossoms to melons, green to ripening. Each day we watched. I thought tomorrow. He chose that night. That was so terrible. Those melons were so gorgeous. And he took a bite out of every single one. I would have given him any single one, but he took bites out of all of them. I was a little mad. When I drove home from Dickinson the way that Sue drove home from Dickinson, and when we would come over that hill and could see the first look at the Blue Mountains, it felt I'm home. All the worries of what was going on at the college were over, and I was home at the farm. This is Christmas Eve. Quiet as the Blue Ridge wrapping the valley, forgiving and unperturbed. No peaks jutting skyward, no canyons to catch the sun or plunge into shade. Only a low blue sweep between farm field and sky. Comfortable as cornbread fresh from the oven. Cup of flour, cup of cornmeal, cup of milk, a bit of butter, 2 eggs, baking powder to ensure its rise, sugar if it's the northern kind. Sure as love long married, preparing to wrap a soft blue sweater, a diamond pendant delicate as the sliver moon that drops above the mountains, tucked inside the pocket. And that recipe really works if you want to make northern cornbread, and it's good. And I imagine all of you will remember this day. Someone forgot. Someone forgot to tell the crickets and the tree toads what Peter Jennings said. Someone forgot to let them know the whole world changed last Tuesday when airplanes flew through buildings and towers tumbled down. They're out there chirping, filling up the dusk with song beneath the silver moon. Breezes stir birch leaves, still green from summer. Day fades beyond the mountains. On the farm, peace sings. One of my duties as a farmer, and I was listed as a farmer, was to fill out an agricultural census. This is the first poem that mentions the farmhouse and the old bank barn. I do have a picture here of that barn. It's one of those magnificent structures. It's probably a reason why we bought the farm rather than the farmhouse. This was just such an amazing piece, such an amazing building. The wood was black walnut, huge timbers that were put there. And the story was that the farmers needed a place for their animals, so they built just small log houses. Let me put this back. The 1798 tax shows that at that point that the bank barn was standing and that there were 2 log houses on the farm. There was one log house still standing up at the top of the hill as you go up Rich Valley Road. It was no longer part of our farm, it was sold off. But it was still standing, it was covered with shingles, and you didn't recognize that it was a 2-story log house, which is what they were. They were first 1 story and then they built 2 stories. That log house was taken down and transported someplace else, and who knows where that got to. Our history is just being dismantled as we live out our lives, and each of these things is taken away saddens me. But that farm was where John and Mary Carruthers brought up their children until they died from arsenic. And they now lie in the Silver Springs Church cemetery. And they died because there was a love triangle. One of the daughters in the family was named Anne, and she was in love with a young man from next door named John Douglas. And the serving girl in the Douglases' household was sort of in love with John Douglas too. So she thought if she could get hired by the Carruthers family and live in their house, she could figure out a way to do in Anne. Then she would, of course, have John to herself. I'm not sure she thought that through that one very well, but so she came out here to Carlisle where Dr. Gustine lived. He had an apothecary, and she bought first, I forget from the story, whether she first bought yellow arsenic or white. There are 2 different kinds. Farms might need them because it would kill rats. So it was not unusual that she could buy some arsenic, but she slipped it into the butter. And then the butter got served, and the family got sick, and the record says, with much vomiting. And Anne didn't really get sick, so she got the other kind of arsenic. She put that in the leaven, The result was that the father John died, the mother Mary died, and did get sick, but she recovered, and the brother was crippled, but he did live and became an attorney. So that's the story. Oh, but one other thing, they began to get suspicious that the only person that was around through all this was Sally. Her name was Sally Clark, and she was the first person hanged in the square here in Carlisle. So that was our farm. She wasn't in our house because remember, that was the log house. So when you are a farmer, and I was very happy to be a farmer, even though I was also chaplain at the time. I don't know that people carry too much about that, but anyway, here's a Census of Agriculture. Has anybody else ever seen one or filled one out? It's sort of like the regular census form you fill out, except there are lots of questions. They tell you the time required is 2 minutes per response. I must mark 7 boxes, yes or no, in ballpoint pen. Gather 40 acres of grass and trees that grow green with spring and fit them neatly onto a page. I have no emus or ostriches, but emus and ostriches cavort with horses, sheep, and bees in question 2. I watch my ewes nibble green spring and make an X on yes. Will I plant, cultivate, or grow mushrooms, bulbs, shrubbery, rhizomes, hay, or sod? I look through the window at drifts of daffodils, purple lilacs, pink magnolias, greening pasture, sweep of lawn. I've watched the oak push skyward until it's higher than the house, watch holly hide the farmhouse door. I've measured lilacs by the 2nd-story window and dreamed yellow daffodils in December. Past allotted time, I reach the final question. Look for space to write the dollars spent on boards and paint for fences. A place to note the cost of tin to roof the old bank barn, the cost of thistle seed for birds who perch outside the farmhouse door, singing Thanksgiving from branches of the beach. I wonder who will believe the price of tractor tires or pumps for springs and wells. There is no space. The box asks only what I earn in sales. Anna and Emily produce 20 pounds of wool, enough for several sweaters, mittens, a pair of socks. The price of wool is 40 cents. I receive $8. I mark the final box, fold the form, and mail it. In Indiana, the scanner will read 7 X's inked in boxes, note barcode number 429273. Know nothing about Pennsfield Farm, where a pheasant now pecks my window, a robin's egg shatters on the driveway, and bluebells bloom on the hillside, and with violets beside a flooding spring. Looking around the crowd, with some exceptions, most of us are older, we're all getting older, but many of us have already been through the process of downsizing. So this is downsizing. What to do with mother's Wedgwood? Grandmother's hope chest stuffed with linens, the sideboard passed down for generations. What to do with extra paintings? Even this, a little still life, a goblet and with bowl of fruit on a polished table. I let them go where they will, but leave in place the slant of sun on yellow pine, blue mountains seen through wavy windows, lilacs in April, and beneath the hill, the Conan de Gwinnett. I love it that I can just say Cana de Gwynedd in this group and everybody knows what that is. I read this poem as you talk when they say, huh? What's that? Never failing. There is always the last turn of the key, a drive down the lane through the pines, a glance in the rearview mirror of the stone house and red bank barn, the leaving, the giving up, the final turning away. But the click of the lock and signing of papers do not end the tie to land. Even now, daffodils poke to the light. Buds of magnolias and ancient lilacs swell. Pastures the sheep grazed grow green. A doe leads this year's fawn to the never-failing spring. The Cana de Gwynedd rushes to the river, while along its banks great blue herons and egrets flap, wade, and fly. Dutchmen's breeches and trout lilies bloom. As they always do, bluebells will carpet the hills in May, and by June be gone. When he took title to the land. Before he called the land his own, the pasture sloped to the fence, sloped more through the woods, and slipped into the creek that wandered east until it reached a south-flowing river. When he took title to the land, he mowed the pastures, rooted out groundhogs, mended miles of fences, logged, cut trails, stopped to watch deer drink from the spring and fish swim east to reach the river. When after 40 years he grew too tired to tend pasture, too weary to paint white fences or lug logs from the woods to stack by the door, he slipped away beyond the fence, woods, creek, and river, told no one when or where he was going. The pasture still slopes to the wide board fence. The oak woods wander to the Cana de Gwynedd. Deer linger at the never-failing spring, while the creek meanders through many bends to the wide, south-flowing Susquehanna. Now I'm going to move from the farm, and I think this poem is an important poem right now as we're thinking about hurricanes and watching the path of Matthew. Some of the tracks bring Matthew right up here to Pennsylvania, and that happened before, if you remember, October 2012. Late October 2012. To prepare for the storm, we rounded up flashlights, bought batteries, jars of peanuts, dried apricots, boxes of granola, to feed ourselves and light our evenings for days without electricity. I froze water for ice, filled bottles with drinking water, a bathtub to flush toilets. We located the crank radio, and from the Weather Channel learned when Hurricane Sandy was expected. As the sky darkened, wind stripped leaves from maples, rain blew sideways, I thought we were prepared for anything. Neither of us knew you were dying. In the almost silence, after the terror of the hurricane and the dark night of your dying, after hymns, words, flowers, and mourners, After lawyers, bankers, document signings, after all this, it is right and good to sit alone in your leather chair in the almost silence of Sunday morning. The only sound, a solemn tick, the pendulum of the tall case clock I surprised you with early on a Sunday morning. The children were young when Ed brought the antique clock in his truck to our farmhouse door. You caressed the cherry wood, marveled at the clock's finials with stars, carried it in, set it up, and with a crank, for the first time, wound it. Then, in a ritual that was surely love, still in your robe and slippers, you wound it every Sunday morning. We watched the clock's moon rise and set, heard the steady tick of minutes, the chime of hours, almost believing our calendar dial would keep turning forever. And for those of you who love tall case clocks, this is a Handel clock, and the clock was brought to us by Ed LaFond. So Ed really surprised John, and that clock, Ed had noted when he was fixing it, had to be only lightly restored. He found a sign. It was signed on the backboard, and it was signed George Carruthers. So that clock belonged in the Carruthers family. So sometimes things just happen in wonderful and amazing ways. That ends my presentation. I did prepare for you a lot of documents here. The story about the arsenic in the leaven was published in the journal, and back in 1988, and I had hoped there were some extra copies around, but mine is there, and you can look at that story. There is a chart that I made out. The Scotch-Irish, when they came, they loved this area because it reminded them of Scotland. I mean, Scotch-Irish are really Scottish, but they had to move to Ireland and took off from Ireland to come here. But they loved the stone, and they built houses. The early houses of stone are so often built by the Scotch-Irish. But they settled in neighborhoods. And the reason they settled in neighborhoods was because they were the first ones to come across the river. There were treaties with the Indians that the settlers were not allowed to cross the Susquehanna until 1730, and they came very soon after that. And then, so for protection against the Indians, they settled near one another. And often one of the houses was fortified. And this group of settlers, which included, it's the neighborhood which is Hoagstown. So Jonathan Hoag on one end in his tavern, which is in the tavern book, and the other end was the Walker Tavern, which was torn down to make the Honda dealer, which made us all very sad. That really made up the other end. So we've got the Hoags, we've got the Walkers. It was the McCormick's house that was fortified. It was set back a little bit. And then the Carruthers and the Loudons. So all of these people could get to the McCormicks if needed when the Indians came. Benjamin Hoag, Jonathan's son, a young son, went out one evening the cow got loose, and they went to find the cow and bring the cow home, and Benjamin was killed by Indians. There were several Indian murders right around in that area. So I have stories about those things. I did spend 3 years in the library writing a novel. It was a very bad novel. I'm not a novelist. I'd rather write poetry or be a farmer. But I researched, all the research was done in the library and all the documents were there. And I decided I had to have characters in my novel, and they might as well be real people. So I was able to find out which daughter of which family married which son of what other family, and that's what those big charts are all about, showing how all those intermarriages happened. So you're welcome to come up and take a look. There are a lot of documents in a book there that I made for John for a Christmas present that have a lot of historical documents in it. So my question is, do you have any questions? Yes.
I have a couple questions. First one, did Annie ever marry the guy that...
The question is, did Annie ever marry the guy, John? No, she never got married at all, which is really interesting. So maybe that was, I don't know, maybe it was, she was so soured by the whole event, she decided, I don't know.
And the other question is, I'm not a farmer, I've never lived in a farmer, so you kept referring to a bank barn.
Yes.
What is that?
I really need a picture of this barn from the other side in order to explain what a bank barn is. It's built into a bank of earth so that here's the front side that looks like this, and you need to be able to come up on a little hill and go in the door and end up on basically the second floor, because this is where you store the hay and the straw. Hay foot, straw foot helps you to know which side the hay belongs on and which side the straw belongs on. And then there's a hole in the floor, and you can drop the hay down to feed the animals. The animals are kept down here, and you can drop the straw down for the bedding. So that's a bank barn, and this is huge. It's a huge building, and there's stalls for 14 horses, big stalls for 14 horses, there are lots of these around in the area. Some of them that are a little later are brick, and they have magnificent on the ends. They have designs on the ends, and they're absolutely magnificent. But the stone ones were the early ones. And some of them at first had thatch on the roofs, and some people feel this may have indeed had thatch originally. Obviously, by this time, it was tin. Good questions. And I hope you'll go around and look for bank barns. Other questions? Yes?
Did the attorney's son have anything to do with the prosecution of the...
Oh, no, he didn't. He only became an attorney later. The prosecution obviously happened right away. I actually have the actual record of the trial is in our collection here. So I was able to actually see that and read that. It was pretty clear that she was guilty, and she was walked to the gallows by a preacher, whatever, I don't know. Asked her to confess her sins or whatever they did when you got walked to the gallows. I've never done that. I mean, as a preacher, I've never walked someone to the gallows. Yes?
Do you ever write about the flooding of the Conduit Lagoon?
I did. I think there's one of the poems in the book refers to that. What happened was, in terms of the farm, we heard this terrible crashing. And when we were sleeping one night, we wondered what in the world was happening. And the covered bridge that was up past 81 came underneath 81, and that was, we were hearing it bang against 81 bridge, and it landed up in our lower pasture. And in the book, I have a document from the county, because we said, do you want your bridge back? And they said, no, we don't want our bridge back. You can do what you want with it. So we had the job of clearing up the bridge off of our lower field. So yeah, the flood was pretty bad. They measure floods right at Hoagstown, right that behind us, and if it gets over 5 feet, it floods. So we watch for that rise. Other questions? Yes.
Mary Anne, how far, and maybe it's just an estimate, is the creek from Hoagstown? Is it, I mean, in the day, would it be an easy walk?
Oh yeah, I mean, oh yeah, because it's about a mile from the farm down to the Great Road. And so to walk a mile at that point was no big deal. I mean, you'd go down to see your neighbors and your friends.
It's such an interesting thing to think about, because when I drive around, the Conagawinnet is right there, and it seems like it's, we don't think of it being so close with some of the development, but it's right in the heart of the area.
Well, of course, the farmers would want to be close to it. If their wells went dry, they would have to get water from the Conagawinnet. Although the water was pretty available, they dug hand-dug wells were very shallow. It's amazing how shallow they were. So some of the local farms had to dig deeper wells while we were living at the farm. We didn't, we had a pretty deep well. Yes?
You mentioned that you've done a lot of research for your various works. I'm wondering, what type of records do you most enjoy looking at in order to determine a lot of these relationships?
Well, I loved the fact that we had, Klein's Gazette. We have all the copies here, and at one point, we didn't have to look them at on microfiche. We got to handle the original documents, and we could turn the pages. It was a lot easier. So you could find all sorts of amazing records there. That's where I could find out, when the farm was sold, and that's where I got the word never failing spring. That was in one of when they were going to sell the farm way back. They said there was a good orchard and a never failing spring. So I felt I could, and I know where the spring is, and it's still going. So Klein's Gazette, the deeds of Vendu, and I even appreciate the poetry book of Isabel Oliver, because she lived in Pat Vance's house, and so she was one of this group that was the neighbors. And so she recorded a lot of these stories and events, and she has a poem about the arsenic, the murder. In fact, it's kind of interesting. Sometimes they wrote long poems. This is a part of it. Upon the bank of a slow winding flood, the good Alfonso, that's John Carruthers, modest mansion stood, because it was a two-story wood house. A man he was throughout the county known, of sterling sense, to social converse prone. He walked the plains with such majestic grace, when time had drawn its furrows on his face. 'Twas easy to infer his youthful charm, when first the fair Mary Armstrong, blessed his arms. Maria, oh, what mixed emotions rise, grief, pity, indignation, and surprise at thought of thee. Thy sweetness might have moved the harshest mind, the kindest taught the ungentlest to be kind, and yet a fiend, Sally Clark, enshrined in female mold, could thy heart-rending agony behold, when he, by her cruel wiles, thy wedded heart was basely severed from its dearest part. We don't write poetry like that anymore. At the same time, it's a historical record. And I find it, valuable, and you can go look at that book in the library. So we're very fortunate to have this group, this society that's been here keeping our records. Now we need to have the heart to go out and save more of these things. Mary Frances said she's going to a wedding, and she drove up the driveway, and she said, I've been here before, and she had been. She'd been to our farm. She'd been to Pennsfield Farm. And it makes me cry. That's now a wedding venue. It's ruined. It's not the same place. The barn, well, the hen house is the bathroom. They've taken out the stalls. They put concrete on the floor. They've taken up the old wood on the floor of the second floor, as it was, because you couldn't dance on that because it was rough. And probably the worst indignity, they've hung crystal chandeliers in the barn. So I don't go there anymore, but it's in my heart. So thank you for being here. Come up and ask any more questions if you have them. Thanks so much.